Good to see you today.
Yeah, nice to be here. Nice to be seen.
Yeah, good. So I thought we'd just have a nice conversation and see where it leads us. So give some people some information about you that they don't know, and why don't we get to it? So we're in a pandemic, and a lot of people are wondering, what you might take as a positive coming out of this. What are the positives that we can take?
Well, it depends on each person. Everybody has their own reality, and some people will see it as all down, and some people will see it as a lot of positives. Of course, obviously, if you think it over, there's no value in the former. So, what are the positives? Well, I think that really depends on each person, as I said. But if you dig deeper and try to think about the real long-lasting, enduring, deep value of your practice, then you have to look at what Saotome Sensei has often said, O Sensei said, Yamaguchi Sensei said. Almost every high-level teacher I know at one time or another expressed the view that you cannot reach a high level of Aikido through the repetition of basic techniques alone. Not to say that they're not important. They are extremely important. But repetition is really the enemy, because what we need to be doing in Aikido is learning to listen to our bodies and listen in a way that is visual to our minds, which means, for example, in developing strong ki is not a physical thing. Strong ki is a mental thing. And of course, the breath is traditionally used to help in the development of ki, but you can't be concentrating on your breath when you're in full speed doing Aikido. So it's a temporary medium that you use to learn to train your mind to lead your ki. Traditionally in the Chinese arts, they say that intent leads ki, and ki produces the motion. So learning to be aware of your body in a different sense, a different orientation than strictly physical. And the physical, and I talk about the muscular, of course, there's how you move your body in terms of yin and yang or aiki, but really the orientation, we never stop to think about how are we really orientated. And I would say that 75% of people doing Aikido and people not doing Aikido as well are oriented, I'm not sure if that's which one is correct, with their body as the source of reality. And that is just very, very limiting. I mean, you can get strong. Anybody who works out hard enough is going to get strong, but that will never make you really skillful. Mm-hmm. The way that you have to get skillful is to learn to move, not your physical muscles, but to move the bones that hold the muscles. And the way that you have to do that is to get your mind, your intent into your skeleton. So one of the first things that you have to practice in slow motion in the beginning is skeletal breathing into the bones. And in order to do that, of course, you have to focus on the bones. And so focusing on the bones is bringing intent into the bones. And when you do that enough, gradually you can do Aikido movements with this kind of orientation, that you're moving the bones instead of the muscle. When you do this so much tension goes out of your body, so much more projection of ki is the result. And Yamaguchi Sensei once said, how do you put it? What was his words now? There has to be I can't quote him exactly, but there has to be freedom of movement in the joints. The skeleton has to move freely, right? So you have to orientate yourself to a deeper level than the physical muscle. I mean, above that is the fascia, which is still better than the tendons and the muscle. But most important is the ki. And the ki needs to be strengthened in the bones. And the only way you can do that is through the focus of your mind. So I made a short story long here, but this kind of developing this kind of mindfulness, you can do it when you're walking. You can do it when you're doing your solo practice. Hopefully you are doing solo practice if you're not able to do partner practice. Just becoming mindful of how you hold your posture with your skeleton. How there's a, think of your ki as a thread that runs through the inside of your bones. If it was anchored above your head and below your perineum and below the insteps of your feet, like a puppet. And it's all being held together by that. And this is a consciousness. And what it does is it gets you away from that orientation of the brute force, or I'm looking for a better word. Just, for example, if you're threatened, if your immediate response is forcefulness, then you are strictly physically orientated. And if you want to speak self-defense even, that's not a good place to be. You're going to have a full-on collision, and somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and it's going to really matter more about luck and who gets there first than anything else. So, it's not good. Furthermore, I mean, I'm not going to get into this because I've talked to it a lot in my presentation at the ASU winter camp and so forth, but O-Sensei expressed constantly that we need to learn to move our bodies in the way that manifests the 5 dimensions, i.e. AOU. If we are physically orientated, if we see ourselves as a body, we cannot do that. We can manage to get maybe 2 or 3 out of 5. If we are, the people who are not physically orientated are generally spiritually orientated. And the spiritually orientated also can't get it, because it's a much more lovely mentality. It's beautiful, it's spacious, it's loving, caring, but it's still it's dualistic, because you see the body and the mind now as separate things. And the spirit is expanding and the body is down there and the spirit is above the body. And all. It's not. That's not Aikido. Aikido is when you express all 5 dimensions centered around the will. And the will is the Kototama of E. So when you do that, it frees up. It's not physical anymore. And it's not physical, of course. And it's not spiritual, because it's not some kind of aspiration. It only happens here and now. It's not something you're striving for. It's something that you're born with. It's something that's already a part of you that you just have to become aware of. Okay. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, well, that's a lot. So the individual training that certainly you've been sort of helping us through on the Tuesdays that we've met through the pandemic, I found them incredibly helpful. And I know that those of us that participated in them really, certainly gave me something to work on through this. We're all relegated mostly to physical, individual. Certainly March through June was incredibly individual practice
Right.
and Zoom sharings. So anyway, one of the things that I kind of remember, but I'm curious as to what got you to Boston, because that ended up being sort of the center. That was where you left to Japan from, and that's where you came back to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was, of course, raised in the Midwest in Minneapolis. And my aspiration in my later teenage years and early 20s was music. But I had some experiences early on that kind of opened up my view to looking for something more spiritual. And that, although it was music to a large extent that originally brought me to Boston, in the back of my mind, I was always looking for something that I didn't quite know how to even know what I was looking for. I couldn't find the question, but I was orientated in that direction. And so when I got to Boston, living
I'm sorry, Sensei. So that's pretty fascinating. So before you came to Boston, you were still in this sort of idea of searching?
Yes, already. Yeah, already at that time. And, you know, at 18 years old, I just suddenly one day I was at one of these drive-in, you know, takeout places, and I ordered a hot dog or something, and I took one bite of it, and I said, you know what, I can't eat this anymore. And I didn't know anything about macrobiotics or anything like that at that time. I just said, you know, this just doesn't feel right. And I threw it out, and I didn't eat meat for another bunch of years after that. And I really still don't to any extent. Something in me was looking for something, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew what it wasn't. You know? And when I went to Boston, I went with one of my best friends who's passed away now. We played music together. It was a little heartbreaking because I at some point had to tell him, look, I can't do this anymore because I got to do some other things and I don't have time to do both. And so I started studying Oriental philosophy with Michio Kushi, who was the student of George Osawa, or his Japanese name Sakurazawa Nyoichi. And I did that for several years. And I actually helped with the teaching after several years of doing that. I opened up what they called study houses and worked with dietary stuff and philosophical stuff. You know, the macrobiotic philosophy is basically kind of a ripoff of Taoism. George Osawa, the Michio's teacher, was an incredibly exceptional human being. He was one of those people that could kind of understand things without actually doing them, which is almost nobody can do that. I've talked to Sao Tome about him at length, and Sao Tome says, yeah, you know, George Osawa, he saw Aikido and he got it. He never trained, but he understood it, you know. And, you know, Osawa wrote well over 100 books. I tried to read one of his books, which was on Shinto once. And, you know, it was about 1,000 pages long. It was just, he was in another realm altogether. Michio took it in a different direction. He took it in a very physical direction. Everything was all about health and food. And, you know, of course, it was also philosophy, but after several years of that, I kind of got to the end of it. I was like, you know what? This ain't doing it. I'm trying to teach other people and I'm not satisfied myself. So obviously that's not good. So at that point, I had the good fortune to run through macrobiotic circles, to run into a man named Alkan, Alkan Yamaguchi, who was the brother of Yamaguchi Seigo, the Aikido master. And we talked to some length, and he gave me a letter of introduction to study with his brother in Japan, at which point I said, yep, that must be an omen, right? So
was he in Boston?
he was in Boston visiting Michio, yes. Alkan, Yamaguchi Sensei's brother, was the main macrobiotic teacher in Kyoto, Japan.
I didn't know that. I knew you had a letter from his brother, but I didn't know exactly what was there.
When I was in Japan, Alkan would often come to Tokyo and hang out with Yamaguchi Sensei all day long. They go from one coffee shop to the next to smoking cigarettes, as you could do in coffee shops in those days. Smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee all day long and just talk. So, yeah, he was a wonderful.
Alkan did not train Aikido?
He did not train Aikido, but as we may get into in this interview at some point, there was a group of people that all hung out together and all knew each other well, and there was no central figure, although O Sensei was a big part of that. But Alkan was one of them. Yamaguchi Sensei was one of them. Saotomi would later, through Yamaguchi Sensei and O Sensei, became part of the group. I'll talk about that later, but a lot of people don't realize how connected all these people were. They think, oh, they were all separate. They definitely were not. Let's move on.
All right. So you got this letter of introduction, and it was sort of like a light bulb went off and said, I'm going to Japan to meet Yamaguchi Sensei? Or?
Well, kind of like an omen, you know. I mean, I had a lot of interests that I had kind of run across through studying about Japan with Michio. I was interested in, I've always been interested in music, and I got interested in Japanese classical music. I wanted to study that. Michio used to explain a lot of things by writing kanji on the blackboard, you know, and explaining what the kanji meant. I was fascinated with the kanji. I wanted to learn how to write that language and how to read that language. So I had several motives before it ever became Aikido that I was interested in going to Japan.
So macrobiotics and shakuhachi and calligraphy
and language and
and so you arrived in Tokyo and just handed Yamaguchi Sensei the letter. You've written about this, so we don't need to cover that. What I'll do is I'll link that article when we send this out. So we don't have to spend time on what you've already.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that would be extra.
So that was 1970. Yes, that you went.
Yeah, I got to Japan in Christmas, around Christmas time of 1969. And O Sensei had just passed away very recently. I don't know that it would have made too much difference, because at that point he was probably not too well, and I wouldn't have got a chance to study with him anyway. But
well, even so, right? The 1970s, from what I've read, I mean, the grouping of teachers that were at Hambu was, I mean, it's considered a golden time, right? It's you still had Osawa Sensei teaching there. Saotomi Sensei was teaching there. So can you talk a little bit about who were the main influences at Hambu for you?
Yeah, Hombu Dojo, they call it, some people call it the golden age, the golden years, and other people call it the hell dojo of Shinjuku. But it was both. It was very, very physical, hard training. The head instructor there, when I first got there, was Koichi Tohei, who was the only tendan. And he was there, if I remember correctly, he was there till about 1972.
Oh,
I'm not sure exactly, but he was there for a year to up to 2 years before he broke off and created the Key Society. Um, we have to remember that, O Sensei's background was Daitoryu. And in Daitoryu, like in all jutsu, the principle as it applies to the movement of the physical body is taught in great detail. And so O Sensei had that teaching as his foundation, as his root. And as he was introducing, he was introducing Aikido sort of as he created it. The two were happening simultaneously. He was changing it constantly over a period of decades. And most of his students were accomplished martial artists when they first started studying Aikido. In fact, most of them challenged the founder and lost and became his student. So they understood the jutsu. He didn't feel he had to teach the jutsu to them. Instead, he had to break them out of the rigidity of the jutsu and get them into a more flowing form. So he didn't teach those basic Aiki roots. And as a result, as generations went by, the students coming didn't have those roots. You didn't have people that had studied these things in depth or at all. And what happened is people lost the roots, they lost the foundation, and all they had was the vyutai, or the flowing form of Aikido, which can only go so far because you're lacking a foundation. Anyway, Tohei was the head guy there. He was quite amazing. He was a very highly developed individual. I had the opportunity to be thrown by him a few times, and it's an experience I'll never forget. It was like being picked up by a big wind. It kind of went flying. When he left, Kisaburo Osawa, 9dan, he became the head instructor. And he was a more spiritual man. He was also a Buddhist. When he bowed to the shrine, instead of bowing the way everybody else does with his palms down, he would bow with his palms up, which is a Buddhist bow. Although I'm not going to get into it here, but I've talked at length about the kanagi, or the physical and spiritual orientation to Aikido, which in the Kototama circles is called kanagi and sugaso. The sugaso was definitely Osawa, Kisaburo Osawa Sensei. He tried to show the expansiveness of the movement, and he tried to show the spirituality of the movement. And he didn't move too quickly. And a lot of the younger students were like, "Oh, he's an old man, he can't move anymore," which was nonsense, because I hit him pretty hard a couple times, and I just don't know quite what happened after that, but I was gone. Right, he could do whatever he wanted to do, but he was trying to show something specific. The most popular teacher at that time, after Tohei left, was Yamaguchi Sensei. Yamaguchi Sensei was completely different in his Aikido than Osawa. Yamaguchi Sensei's Aikido was fast as lightning. He didn't do slow Aikido. He did it fast, in the moment. When you hit him, it was boom, that was it. The whole thing was finished. He was doing neither the physical nor the spiritual. He was in the center. He was trying to manifest the here and now, the reality of it. And he was the most popular teacher. There were very seldom less than 100 people on the mat in the evenings when he was teaching. He taught several days a week, as most teachers did. They usually taught one morning and one evening, sometimes 2 evenings. After that, you had the third generation. Well, of course, you had people like Watanabe. You had people like
So when you were there with Watanabe, was he doing the no-touch stuff, or
he,
is that more recent?
that was more recent. I mean, he was always kind of doing this torso moving thing, you know, but it was more recent that he got. I mean, I think he ran out of things to do, you know. His technique was relatively limited. Basically, these people after Yamaguchi and Tohei and you got into what's called the third generation. Sao Tome Sensei was kind of neither second nor third. He was kind of 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he was with the group of the third generation, which included Chiba and Kanai Sensei and a lot of others. At that time, those people at Hombu Dojo were mostly 5 and 6 dans. I don't know why. I think Sao Tome was probably a 6 dan at that time, and they had an afternoon class. They didn't have evening classes. That was only for the senior instructors. Sao Tome Sensei stood out, definitely, because he had a charisma that you didn't find in people like Kanai, or you didn't find in people like the more strictly physically orientated senseis, which was most of them. Most of them weren't much interested in anything about O Sensei other than how powerful he was. It was very hard training, especially as a foreigner, because there was, I won't say everybody, but there were a lot of people, especially Uchideshi, who felt that a foreigner shouldn't be there and physically tried to break you. And if you didn't show them that you could break them, they would. So you had to do that once or twice. And I experienced that. I tried to avoid it. I was never into that. But, you know, in order not to get my arms broken, I sometimes had to do that.
So you mentioned Heljo Dojo of Shinjuku. So was this sort of a name the foreigners gave the place, or?
No, actually, that was, you know, O Sensei was always trying to get his higher students, especially, and the third generation especially, to practice Aiki, to move more slowly and to try to feel what was going on. And they just wanted to scream and yell and go at each other like crazy. And the people that lived in the neighborhood, all they ever heard was, yeah. So they called it, the name Hell Dojo came from the neighborhood.
Uh-huh. What's going on up there?
What the hell, yeah.
And so you mentioned Sao Tome Sensei standing out. Do you remember sort of the first time you saw him and sort of when you guys became acquainted?
I first saw Sao Tome probably with almost immediately, because I was in Hombu Dojo immediately when I got to Japan. And like I say, he was teaching, I believe, once a week. There were 3 classes in the evening. There was the 3 o'clock class, and then there was, I think it was an hour-and-a-half break. And people would go out and have tea, and then they come back for 2 more hour classes with a half an hour in between. And the 3 o'clock class was usually taught by the 5 and 6 dan instructors. So Sao Tome would teach one of those classes. But as I said earlier, he had a very different feel about him than anybody else. There was a nobility, a charisma that you can't have without having some kind of experience beyond the physical. Mm-hmm. This is just something I understand. You can't be just physically orientated and carry yourself with that kind of feeling without feeling incredibly arrogant. And he was not that either. He was just confident.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, he talks a little bit about that time and that sort of awakening in his book, The Light on Transmission.
that's right. That's right.
Quite interesting, and highly recommended for anybody who hasn't read it. Yeah, so you would see him at 3 o'clock. Was he teaching weapons? Was that?
No, he was teaching weapons, but that was a different class, and it was in secret. It was not in secret to Hombu, but in secret to anybody else. It was only select people who were allowed to study with him, and he was the only one at Hombu who was allowed to teach weapons. They were very much against weapons training at Hombu from the day I got there. It was a major part of O-sensei's curriculum, but when O-sensei passed away, the doshu, Kishomaru Sensei, who was a great leader, a great statesman, and he was an incredibly talented person in keeping people of great power together. But he put a lot of brakes on what could be taught. He did not want the old style of Aikido to be taught. He did not want anything except the flowing form of Aikido to be taught. He did not want weapons to be taught because he felt that that would hinder the passing down of Aikido to the world. It would be misinterpreted. So
it's interesting because at least from my knowledge, the teachers of Saotome Sensei's time all did weapons, all
yes.
brought their weapon systems here. Maybe not so much Yamada Sensei, but certainly Chiba Sensei had a very rich weapons curriculum. So
right.
it's pretty interesting that they were told not to do it, but they did it anyway.
Yeah. There was still, even at that time, this trying to draw a division between the roots of Aikido and modern day Aikido. And I do have to say that, all of it was not above board. They tried to claim that O-sensei never studied this and never studied that. And, they do this with all great religious figures. He was born out of the side of an elephant, and the Buddha, right? Christ was born from a virgin, and, O-sensei studied so many things. Of course, his roots were Daitoryu, his biggest roots, but he studied various kinds of sword styles. And as in the words of Saotome, because of his stature, because O-sensei was known as a great martial artist, he didn't have to study various sword schools. He'd just call up the Grand Master on the phone and say, hey, let's get together and train today. And it would happen all the time, But Kishomaru did not want that to be known. So, in fact, they even tried to destroy O-sensei's history in Daitoryu, which is just sheer foolishness because you could never hide that. When O-sensei was first teaching, the certificate he had on his wall behind him was a Daitoryu certificate. And later they photoshopped the Daitoryu part out. Unbelievable. Yeah, so that's that.
Congratulations on your vaccine. What was it, yesterday or the day before? It's a monumental move for some of us that are looking forward to getting ours.
Yeah, I feel very torn, with that, because I feel it's a necessity. It's important to do it. At the same time, I've never been into vaccinations, so I kind of feel like it's going against. I'm very much into natural medicine, and I don't like doing that sort of thing. But in this case, it's certainly in my case as a teacher, I can't responsibly not do it. So,
yeah, just, just some level of safety and peace of mind that you're
Right.
not putting yourself and maybe others at risk. Uh, in the
Yeah,
future.
I can't do that.
So one of the not so great things, or maybe good, bad, who knows, the Boston Dojo, maybe 40 years of Boston Dojo existence had to close. And how are you feeling about that? Plans for teaching in the future locally?
Yeah, it's interesting. Things sometimes happen for a reason. Um, Boston Dojo first opened up in 1980 in the spring, and we've had 4 locations in the last 40 years. The last one we had was my favorite for as far as the physical dojo. It was the most beautiful. The first one may be my favorite in other ways, just because we were so just beginning and so excited about the training. And we've had thousands of students through the doors. As you know, we have a number of people who came out who are now instructors and teaching at somewhat higher rankings as well. I'm very pleased with the history of Shobu. I always felt, and perhaps since we've already discussed some of the roots, you can understand that, I gave the name Shobu, and Shobu came from O-sensei, who it was when before he passed away, he said, that's what I should have called it. I should have called it Shobu Aikido. Bu is Budo, martial, and Sho is saint or sage. And what the word insinuates is martial training to produce wisdom or to go towards a higher spirituality. Mm-hmm. And that was the way, the focus that I've always tried to present. Sometimes you have to be more physical to do that, but that's always been the orientation. Over the years, the third dojo, actually the second dojo we had, I think we had 100 students as on the roster, and the mat crowded all the time. In the last dojo we had, which was in Somerville, before they closed, we were down to maybe 25 students, between 25 and 30, and actually having trouble even keeping the doors open anymore. And that was before the COVID. So when the COVID came, it became pretty apparent that this couldn't last. And I was actually fortunate to be able to be released from the lease, because we had a couple of years left on it and we could no way pay that money. But okay, all of that aside, many people also have said, many Aikido teachers, that Aikido cannot be passed down in large groups. And I have always believed that. I mean, when I trained in Japan, I went to 3 different dojos. I trained at Hombu to practice what I was learning at Yamaguchi's dojo. I trained in Kamakura with Takeda Sensei, Yamaguchi Sensei's student, for physical conditioning, because they were like very, very physical. You have to be thrown 200-300 times every class. And I trained at Yamaguchi Sensei's dojo, which was on a hardwood floor, like a basketball floor. Nobody fell down. It was about trying to study movement and feeling. And that's where I learned. That's where I really learned from the teacher. Of course, you learn by practicing. You get insights and feelings in your own body, and that's teaching yourself in a sense, and that's absolutely necessary as well. But you can't pass down Aikido in large groups, and so these kind of seminars where you have 100, 200 people, they're wonderful events for people to share things together. But you're not going to get into really learning something on a subtle level. That's going to have to be done in smaller groups. Getting rid of the dojo for me, it was time because it was too big. It's too big. I don't want to have a big dojo anymore. I don't think anybody should have a big dojo anymore because you can't do what needs to be done now with a big dojo. Aikido is not about making money. I mean, sometimes you have to, if you're like me and you live off it, you have to survive, but it's not about making money. And it's a good thing because you're never going to make any anyway. Right? You've got to have one-on-one potential with your students if you're going to be able to actually pass something down of value. So not only do dojos have to go back to what they originally were, most of the teachers that I knew who had dojos outside of Hombu in Japan, they were in their garage. You know, they had 10, 5, 6 students. And that's, when O-sensei was teaching, most of the places he taught, he had less than 10, 15 students, right? Can you imagine having 10, 15 students and studying with O-sensei? You got some training, right? And I think it's got to go.
I think Saotome Sensei mentioned once 10 people on the mat. O Sensei would say, wow, big class today.
Right? Exactly. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's maybe a good thing. And as far as my own teaching is concerned, I will probably have a small place in the future sometime. But my seminars I want to promote small seminars in the future. I don't want to try to have as many people as we can have. And the idea that you have to have enough people to pay enough money to bring us a teacher in, that's got to change as well. Teachers have to begin to take a lot less money for teaching. Hopefully that can be done by doing it more often and instead of taking a lot of money for one time. Mm-hmm. But that would be advantageous in every respect, I think. So yeah, that's how I feel about that.
So you said in a conversation we had earlier that you're going to start doing weapons training outside this spring?
Not outside. I'm going to be doing inside. There's a dance studio near my apartment in Gloucester, very huge space. And I'm assuming that by April we can have open windows. And we will be wearing masks, and we will begin with sword training. Sword training can be done quite comfortably with masks. We will not do barehanded training until we don't have to wear masks anymore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the plan. The second weekend, the second Sunday in April, we will begin. And I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm itching to train.
Yes. I guess the question I would ask is, and you've kind of been hinting at it anyway, is, you know, what are your hopes for Aikido? You know, with you, without you, past me, what would you hope for with this practice?
Well, that's a big question. That's a really big question. You know, we've talked a little bit about the history. And as I said earlier, the major and second generation instructors like Yamaguchi Sensei, Tohei Sensei, Osawa Sensei, these were incredibly talented and incredibly charismatic very high level human beings. And Sao Tome Sensei got that because he associated with them and he trained with them and he had personal relationships with them. A lot of the other people, in fact, all of the other people that I know, didn't have those personal relationships. There was an in-group, as I said. It included some incredible people. There were healers, people who could actually heal by laying on hands. I met them. There was Nakazono Sensei, who came over from judo to study with O Sensei, who later became a Kototama teacher. And there was his Kototama teacher, who was Koji Ogasawara, who was also in the group, who had tried to help O Sensei to understand Kototama. O Sensei's understanding of Kototama was very intuitive. He could manifest it, but he couldn't explain it. Mm-hmm. Right? There were people who could explain it. Deguchi Wanisaburo was an incredibly spiritual man. He was the man who inspired O Sensei most spiritually. And yet he couldn't explain it in detail. He understood the foundations of it, and he expressed it spiritually. And he had incredible spiritual abilities, but he couldn't explain it in detail. He was not a Kototama practitioner. So you had all of these, in the Bible it says, talking in the Old Testament, it says there were giants on the earth in those days, right? Mm-hmm. It was kind of like that. This was a period when you had some incredible people, and they were all known to different people, but very few people realized that they all hung out together. You know, George Osawa used to criticize O Sensei. He says, O Sensei was stronger than any of them, but he because he was so physically strong, he liked to eat sugar sweets. And Osawa would criticize him, you eat too much sugar, you know, and then O Sensei would criticize him and say, you know, your students don't train, you know. So yeah, the future of Aikido, we need to get back to what those people had. We're not, the Aikido is going to die. If we continue with the dualistic aspect, that it's either physical, you can make it work and you're strong and therefore that's good, or the illusion that without real deep ability, there's some kind of spirituality, which is totally false. Both of these things are going to lead Aikido to diminish, and its real incredible depth is going to be lost. We've got to get that back. And in my mind, the way that we get it back is going back to the teachings of O Sensei and beginning to train that way. And this kind of leads us full circle back to what we started with, the value of the pandemic, you know, that you don't have the opportunity to train so much physically. Don't feel too bad about that for a while, you know, because this is a chance. This is an opportunity to be real patient. Be real patient. Take the patience to do some movement yourself and really focus on breathing to your bones and focus on sending your intent in every rooting, anchoring yourself to the walls 10 feet away from you. Develop you feel the ki rooting you in all directions, coming out your feet, coming out your head, coming out your hands. It sounds kind of light fantastic, and what good is that kind of thing? But if you do it a little while, you'll find that you start to do it automatically. You don't have to think about it anymore. Mm-hmm. And when you don't have to think about it anymore, it becomes a part of the way you move, and it changes the way you move. And when you get together with a partner, it's going to change how you feel to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we're all looking forward to sort of seeing what has come out of this, right? We know maybe what our work has been, but really getting to practice it. We're all looking forward to that.
Yeah, in a word, and not to sound like what I'm criticizing, which is people who are just saying that I just want the spiritual side and I don't want the physical side, which is also misses it. But the real spirituality is not the Gaga land. The real spirituality is very integrated deeply into your body, your intuition. This is what is necessary for spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is not something abstract. Spiritual awakening is something that you had from the day you were born. We all have it. You just have to become aware of it. And becoming aware of it is becoming aware of, first of all, of your own body. And then later of your thoughts, your feelings, and so forth, what in Buddhism they call mindfulness, right? Being aware of the moment, right? We have to get that back in Aikido. This habitual just, do 100 of these and do 100 of those, that's fine, but that's beginner's training. That's for the first 3 years. It's to loosen up your joints. Sensei said to remove the sediment. You're never going to go beyond intermediate level with that kind of training. So what I hope for is the real Aikido to come back and people to stop competing with each other in any way, shape, or fashion. Sensei forbid competition. Why did he do that? Because he wanted people to focus on the real depth of Aikido, not just the physical, right? Unfortunately, he didn't get rid of the Dan system. If we'd have got rid of the Dan system, maybe he would have succeeded in that, because the Dan system, now you got everybody competing for higher Dans. It destroys the purpose. In the old days, you had beginners, intermediate, and advanced. That was it. And you had a curriculum. To pass the basic curriculum, you had to know this, 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 and this. To pass intermediate, you had to be able to demonstrate this, this, and this. There's no curriculum in Aikido. You look at Tai Chi, you look at Kung Fu, you look at any of the martial arts which have several hundred to 1,000 some years of history. Every single thing is documented. This is what you've got to learn. This is what you've got to do. And if you do it, you will become a master. Nothing is documented in Aikido. It's all seat of the pants. We've got to get clear about how to train this art and what it contains. That it contains spiritual, physical, mental, psychological, everything. And we've got to train all those different aspects, not just one. Certainly not just being good at Shihonage. So yeah, that's what I hope for.
It's a big hope too. All right. Well, this has been great, Sensei.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you taking the time to have this chat. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed learning a little bit more about what Japan was, and hope we get to have more of these conversations soon.
Yeah, that's a world which is gone now. That Japan doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, but maybe we can get some giants here. So
that would be great, man. That would be it.
Yeah.
At a certain point, like I'm 77 this year, so looking at my ancestry, I figure I got another 15 years maybe. But that's a quick time. I'd love to see it happen in that time. I hope I keep training that long.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.